The horse's hooves thundered against the packed earth as Roderick Jameson pushed his mount harder than he had ever dared, sweat streaming down his face despite the cold night air biting at his exposed skin. 3 hours ago, he had been preparing for bed in his small homestead when Marcus had burst through his door, face white as death, gasping about the well in Kragthar village being poisoned by raiders passing through the territory, and how no one had gotten word to the orcs yet because every other rider had either fled in fear or refused outright to approach an orc settlement. Roderick had not hesitated, grabbing his cloak and saddling his horse before Marcus had finished explaining, because while most humans in the borderlands saw orcs as monsters to be feared and avoided, Roderick had traded with the Kragthar clan for 3 years now, and he knew them as people, families, children who would drink from that well come morning without knowing death waited in every drop. The moon hung full and bright overhead, illuminating the winding path through the forest that separated human farmland from orc territory, and Roderick's heart hammered against his ribs as he calculated the time remaining. The raiding party had poisoned the well sometime around sunset, according to Marcus, who had heard it from a traveler who had witnessed the act but been too frightened to intervene, and dawn would break in perhaps 4 hours, maybe less. Orc villages rose early, he knew, their warriors training before first light, their farmers checking livestock and drawing water for the day's needs. If he did not reach them before sunrise, families would sicken, children would die, and the thought made him dig his heels harder into his horse's flanks despite the animal's labored breathing. The trees began to thin as he approached the boundary markers, crude wooden posts carved with orcish symbols that warned humans away, and he did not slow despite the stories he had heard his entire life about what happened to humans who crossed into orc lands uninvited. A year ago he might have believed those stories, might have turned back at this very spot, but he had met Vrokka at a neutral trading post 18 months past, and everything had changed in that meeting. She had been selling herbs and leather goods at a stall that other humans avoided, her green skin and small tusks marking her clearly as orc, her dark hair braided with colored threads that denoted her clan and status. Roderick had needed medicine for his sick cow, and the human traders had wanted prices he could not afford, so he had swallowed his nervousness and approached her table. She had looked at him with amber eyes that held more wariness than hostility, and when he had asked politely about fever-reducing herbs, she had sold them to him for half what the humans demanded. The cow had lived, and Roderick had returned the next month to thank her and purchase more supplies, and slowly, cautiously, something like friendship had formed between them. He thought of her now as he galloped past the boundary markers into orc territory, remembering how she smiled when she was amused, a small quirk of her lips that made the tips of her tusks more visible. How she had once shared her lunch with him when he had forgotten to bring food to the trading post. How she had told him stories about her village and her people with a quiet pride that made him realize how wrong his upbringing had been about orcs. She was intelligent, kind, fiercely protective of her family, and beautiful in a way that had crept up on him gradually, until he had found himself thinking about her at night when he should have been sleeping, imagining what it might be like to know her better, to be welcomed into her world instead of merely tolerated at its edges. The village appeared ahead, a cluster of sturdy buildings made from timber and stone, larger and more permanent than the ramshackle structures most humans imagined orcs lived in, and Roderick could see the well at the village center, its wooden frame and bucket system visible in the moonlight. No guards challenged him as he rode in, though he knew he must have been spotted, and he pulled his exhausted horse to a halt near the well, dismounting quickly and looking around for any sign of life. A door opened to his left and a massive orc warrior stepped out, axe in hand, his expression dark with suspicion and ready violence. The warrior stood at least 7 feet tall with shoulders broader than any human Roderick had ever seen. His green skin marked with ritual scars, his tusks more prominent than Vrokka's, and his eyes fixed on Roderick with the kind of focus a predator gave prey. "Human," the warrior growled, his voice like grinding stones, "you have made a grave mistake coming here." Roderick raised his hands, palms open, trying to steady his breathing enough to speak clearly. "The well has been poisoned. Raiders came through at sunset. No one told you. I rode through the night to warn you before anyone drinks from it at dawn." The warrior's eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with confusion on his face, and he did not lower the axe. "Why would you warn us? Humans poison orc wells and celebrate it." "Not all humans," Roderick said, his voice stronger now despite his pounding heart. "And I have traded with your village. I know Vrokka. I know your people. I could not let you die from poisoned water when I had the ability to warn you." Other doors were opening now, more orcs emerging to see what disturbance had brought a warrior out with his weapon. And Roderick saw women and older children among them, all staring at him with varying degrees of shock and hostility. Then Vrokka pushed through the gathering crowd, her eyes widening as she recognized him in the moonlight. "Roderick," she said his name like a question, like she could not quite believe what she was seeing. "What are you doing here?" He turned to face her, and felt some of the tension leave his shoulders at the sight of a familiar, not entirely unfriendly face. She wore simple sleeping clothes, a tunic and loose trousers, her hair unbraided and falling around her shoulders in a way he had never seen before. And even in crisis, he noticed how the moonlight caught in the dark strands. "The well," he said quickly, gesturing to the structure behind him. "It was poisoned by raiders sometime around sunset. I only just found out and I rode straight here. No one else would come. I had to warn you before morning." Vrokka's expression shifted from confusion to alarm, and she turned to the large warrior. "Garak, if he is telling the truth, if—" Garak interrupted, his grip tightening on his axe. "He could be lying to cause panic. He could be the one who poisoned it and came to watch us discover it." "Look at him," Vrokka said sharply, moving closer to Roderick and studying his face. "Look at his horse. He has ridden hard and fast. His clothes are soaked with sweat. He is telling the truth, I can see it in his eyes." Roderick met her gaze and saw something pass between them, some wordless communication built on the foundation of their cautious friendship, and he watched her make a decision in real time. She nodded once, definitively, and turned back to address the growing crowd. "Wake the elders," she commanded with an authority that surprised Roderick. "Get Hakra. She knows poisons. We need to test the water immediately and warn everyone not to drink from the well until we know for certain." The crowd dispersed with purpose, orcs moving quickly to follow her instructions, and Roderick realized that Vrokka held more status in this village than he had understood. Garak remained, still watching Roderick with distrust, but he had lowered the axe slightly. "Come," Vrokka said to Roderick, gesturing toward a building near the well. "Bring your horse. We will get you both water and food once we have dealt with this crisis." "The horse needs rest more than anything," Roderick said, running a hand along the animal's sweat-soaked neck. "I pushed him too hard getting here." "Garak will see to the horse," Vrokka said, glancing at the warrior who scowled but nodded. "You come with me." Roderick followed her into what appeared to be a communal building, a large space with tables and benches clearly used for gatherings and meals, and she lit several lanterns before turning to face him properly. In the warm light he could see the concern etched on her face, the way her hands trembled slightly before she clasped them together. "Tell me everything," she said, Start from the beginning. He explained about Marcus bursting into his home, about the raiding party and the poison, about how every other potential messenger had refused to come to the orc village. As he spoke, he watched emotions play across Vrokka's face: anger at the raiders, resignation at the other humans' refusal to help, and something else when she looked at him, something softer that made his pulse quicken. "You could have died coming here," she said quietly when he finished. "If Garak had been less cautious, if someone had shot first and asked questions later, you would be dead. We do not have a history of welcoming humans who cross our borders." "I know," Roderick said, "but I also knew that if I did not come, people would die. Children would die. I have met your nephew at the trading post, the little one who likes the honey candies. I could not let him drink poisoned water when I had the power to prevent it." Vrokka's eyes glistened in the lantern light, and she looked away quickly, but not before he saw the emotion there. "Krunk," she said softly. "Yes, he loves those candies. He asks about the kind human trader every time we prepare for the trading post visits." Before Roderick could respond, the door opened, and an elderly orc woman entered, her face deeply lined with age, her hair white as snow, but her eyes sharp and intelligent. She carried a leather bag and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "Vrokka says the human claims the well is poisoned," the old woman said without preamble. "I am Hakra, healer and poison master for this clan. I will test the water, but if this is a deception, human, you will suffer for it." "I understand," Roderick said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Test it." "Please." Hakra left, and Vrokka gestured for Roderick to sit at one of the benches. He sank down gratefully, only now realizing how exhausted he was from the frantic ride. His legs ached from gripping the horse, his back protested the sudden stillness, and his hands shook slightly from the flood of fear and relief washing through him. Vrokka disappeared through a back door and returned a moment later with a waterskin and a piece of flatbread. "This is from my personal supply," she said, setting both in front of him. "The water is safe from a rain barrel, not the well." He drank deeply, the cool water soothing his parched throat, and bit into the bread, realizing he had not eaten since noon the previous day. Vrokka sat across from him, her amber eyes never leaving his face, and silence stretched between them, comfortable despite the circumstances. "Why did you really come?" she asked finally. "The truth, Roderick, was it just about warning the village, or was there more?" He paused, the bread halfway to his mouth, and considered lying or deflecting, but her directness deserved an honest answer. "Both," he admitted. "I came because it was the right thing to do, because people needed warning and no one else would do it. But I also came because I know you, and the thought of you being hurt or dying from something I could have prevented was unbearable." Color darkened her green cheeks, a flush he had never seen before, and she looked down at the table. "We are friends," she said carefully. "That is all we can be. You know this." "I know what the world says we can be," Roderick replied, setting down the bread. "I am less certain about what we actually are to each other." Before Vrokka could respond, Hakra returned, her expression grim. She set a vial of water on the table between them, the liquid inside a faint yellowish color that looked wrong even to Roderick's untrained eye. "Wolfsbane and nightshade, mixed with something else I cannot identify," Hakra said. "Enough to kill within hours of drinking." The human spoke true. "Our well is poisoned." Vrokka closed her eyes briefly, her hands clenching into fists on the table. "How long will it take to clean the well and make it safe again?" "We cannot clean this," Hakra said flatly. "We must drain it completely, scrub every stone, and let it refill from the underground spring. 3 days minimum, possibly 4, and we will need to find another water source in the meantime." "The river is half a day's walk," Vrokka said, opening her eyes to look at the old healer. "We can send parties with barrels." "We can," Hakra agreed, "but we were lucky tonight. If this human had not come, if he had not ridden through darkness to bring warning, we would have lost dozens of people by noon tomorrow. Children and elders first, then the sick and weak. It would have been a slaughter." The old woman turned her sharp gaze to Roderick, studying him in silence for a long moment. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because it was right," Roderick said. "Because I could not live with myself if I had not tried." Hakra nodded slowly, then looked at Vrokka. "This one is different. Guard him well, child. The world is not kind to those who cross boundaries." She left without explaining whether she meant Roderick crossing into orc territory or something else entirely, and the weighted silence she left behind felt heavy with implication. The next hours passed in organized chaos as the village mobilized to address the crisis. Roderick watched as Vrokka took charge, directing warriors to guard the well so no one accidentally drank from it, organizing parties to travel to the river for emergency water, and coordinating with the elders to plan the well cleaning operation. He had known she was capable from their trading post interactions, but seeing her in her element, commanding respect from warriors and elders alike, revealed dimensions to her he had only glimpsed before. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Roderick found himself sitting near the well under Garak's watchful guard while Vrokka dealt with the aftermath of the crisis. Other orcs passed by, casting curious and occasionally hostile glances his way, but no one challenged him directly. Children peered at him from behind their parents' legs, their wide eyes full of fascination rather than fear, and he remembered Krunk, wondering if the boy was among the curious youngsters watching the strange human in their village. Vrokka returned as the sun cleared the horizon, her face showing the strain of a sleepless night but her bearing still strong. "The council wants to speak with you," she said. "They wish to thank you formally and discuss what happens next." "What happens next?" Roderick repeated, standing and stretching his stiff muscles. "I assumed I would rest a few hours and then ride home." "It is not that simple," Vrokka said, and he heard apology in her voice. "You have seen our village layout, our defenses, our numbers. In other times, we would not let that information leave with a human. We would hold you until we could be certain you would not betray us to human raiders or militia." Roderick felt a chill run down his spine despite the warming morning air. "I saved your village." "I know," Vrokka said quietly. "And I will argue for your immediate release. But you must understand the position we are in. We are a small clan living in constant fear of human aggression. Trust does not come easily, even when someone has earned it." He wanted to argue, to rage against the injustice of being imprisoned after riding all night to save lives. But when he looked into Vrokka's eyes, he saw her own distress at the situation, and he understood that she was caught between her people's safety and her personal sense of honor. He nodded slowly, swallowing his anger. "I understand," he said. "Take me to your council." The council met in a large longhouse at the village center, a building decorated with carved pillars and woven tapestries that depicted orc history and legend. 5 elders sat in a semicircle, 3 men and 2 women, all bearing the weight of age and authority. Hakra was among them, and she nodded slightly to Roderick as he entered with Vrokka at his side. The eldest, a man with more scars than smooth skin and tusks decorated with silver rings, spoke first. "I am Throg, clan chief of Kragthar. You are the human called Roderick Jameson, yes?" "I am," Roderick confirmed, keeping his voice level and respectful. "You have saved many lives today," Throg continued, "my grandson among them. For this, you have the gratitude of our clan and we are in your debt. This is not a small thing." I did what anyone should have done, Roderick said. I require no debt or payment. Nonetheless, you have it, Throg replied. But this creates a complication. You have seen our village, our defenses, our numbers. In the past, we have not allowed such knowledge to leave with humans, for our survival depends on secrecy and caution. Are you saying I am a prisoner? Roderick asked bluntly. We are saying the situation is complex, another elder interjected, a woman with kind eyes that reminded him of his grandmother. You have proven yourself a friend, but the world beyond our village is not so friendly. If you return to human lands and speak of what you have seen, even innocently, that information could reach those who would use it against us. I would not betray you, Roderick said firmly. I have traded with Vrokka for over a year. I respect your people. I would never deliberately put you in danger. Deliberately, Throg echoed. That word carries weight, but humans talk, especially about strange experiences. You would speak to friends, to family. They would speak to others. Eventually, the wrong ears would hear. Roderick felt frustration building in his chest, but forced himself to think clearly. What are you proposing? That I stay here forever? We are proposing that you stay for a time, Hakra said, her voice cutting through the tension. Long enough for us to determine your trustworthiness and for you to understand the gravity of keeping our secrets. 2 weeks, perhaps 3. I have a farm, Roderick protested. Livestock that need tending, crops that need maintenance. We will send someone to care for your farm, Throg said. Vrokka, perhaps, since she knows you and can manage the work without drawing suspicion. It is not ideal, but it protects both you and us. Roderick looked at Vrokka, who met his gaze with an expression that mingled apology and something else, something that might have been hope under different circumstances. The idea of her in his home, caring for his animals and sleeping in his space, created a strange flutter in his chest that he had no business feeling in this moment. And if I refuse, he asked, though he already knew the answer. Then we keep you here by force and everyone involved suffers for it, Throg said simply. But I do not believe you will refuse. You rode all night to save people you barely know. You understand sacrifice and necessity. This is both. The old chief was right, and Roderick knew it. Fighting would accomplish nothing, and in truth, part of him was curious about life in the orc village, about seeing Vrokka in her world, about understanding the people he had defended to skeptical human neighbors. He nodded slowly. 2 weeks, he said. And Vrokka tends my farm with whatever help she needs. My animals do not suffer for my choices. Agreed, Throg said, and something like approval flickered in his scarred face. You will stay in Vrokka's home, as she has space and knows you best. She will be responsible for you during your time here. Vrokka's eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised by this decision, but she bowed her head in acceptance. As you command, Chief. The council dismissed them, and Roderick followed Vrokka out of the longhouse into the full morning sun. The village was busy now. Warriors training in a cleared area, farmers tending to livestock in pens beyond the buildings, children playing games that involved much running and laughter. It looked, Roderick realized, much like any human village at morning time, full of life and purpose and ordinary routine. I am sorry, Vrokka said as they walked toward a modest home on the village's eastern edge. I did not know they would assign you to my care. If I had known, I would have argued against it. Why? Roderick asked, glancing at her. Do you not want me there? It is not about want, Vrokka said quietly. It is about propriety. You are an unmated male. I am an unmated female. Having you in my home will cause talk. Ah, Roderick said, understanding dawning. Your people have the same concerns as mine about such things. We do, Vrokka confirmed. But the elders have spoken, and I will not disobey. You will sleep in the back room. We will maintain proper boundaries. And in 2 weeks, when you leave, there will be no lasting scandal." Her home was larger than his own, a solid structure with 2 rooms separated by a woven partition, a cooking area with a well-maintained hearth, and shelves filled with books and herb bundles. The back room contained a simple bed, a chest for storage, and a window that looked out over the forest. It was comfortable in its simplicity, and Roderick found himself imagining Vrokka reading by candlelight or preparing medicines at the small work table. "It is a good home," he said sincerely. "You have built a good life here." "I have," Vrokka agreed, setting down the pack she had carried from the council meeting. "And I intend to keep it. Which means we must be careful, Roderick. People will be watching us. Any hint of impropriety and my reputation suffers, possibly permanently." "I understand," Roderick said, though his heart sank slightly at the clear boundary she was establishing. "I will be a perfect gentleman." "See that you are," Vrokka said, but her lips quirked in a small smile. "Now rest. You have been awake all night and you look exhausted. I will go to your farm this afternoon and begin tending to your animals. Is there anything specific I should know?" He gave her detailed instructions about his 2 cows, his chickens, his small vegetable garden, and the injured barn cat that needed medication for an infected paw. She listened intently, asking clarifying questions, and he was struck again by her competence and intelligence. When he finished, she nodded. "I will care for everything as if it were my own," she promised. "Sleep now. I will wake you for the evening meal." Roderick lay down on the bed, which was surprisingly comfortable despite its simplicity, and closed his eyes, intending to rest for just an hour. When Vrokka shook him awake gently, the room was dark and he could smell food cooking in the main room. "You slept through the entire day," she said, amusement in her voice. "I started to worry you might sleep through the night as well." He sat up, disoriented and stiff, and ran a hand through his hair. "I did not mean to sleep so long." "Your body needed it," Vrokka said. "Come eat, I made stew." They ate together at her small table, and Roderick discovered that orc cooking was heartier than human fare, with rich flavors and generous portions. Vrokka told him about her visit to his farm, how she had fed his animals and administered medicine to the injured cat, which had hissed at her initially but eventually allowed the treatment. "The cat has good instincts," Roderick said with a smile. "Suspicious of strangers but willing to accept help when needed." "Like someone else I know," Vrokka said pointedly, and he laughed, recognizing the comparison to himself. They fell into an easy conversation, talking about their respective childhoods, their families, their hopes for the future. Roderick learned that Vrokka's parents had died in a border raid when she was young, leaving her to be raised by her Aunt Hakra, which explained the young woman's competence and maturity. Vrokka learned that Roderick had inherited his farm from his father, who had taught him to judge people by their actions rather than their appearance, a lesson that had shaped his willingness to trade with orcs. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man," Vrokka said softly. "He was," Roderick agreed. "He died 3 years ago, winter fever. I think he would have liked you." Vrokka's cheeks darkened again with that flush he found increasingly appealing, and she looked away. "It is dangerous talk, Roderick, thinking about what could be instead of what is." "Perhaps," he said, "but I have never been good at accepting the world as it is when I can see how it should be." She had no answer to that, and they finished their meal in silence that felt charged with possibility. After, Vrokka showed him how to bank the fire properly for the night, and where she kept emergency supplies in case of trouble. The domesticity of it felt natural in a way that surprised him, as if they had been sharing a home for years rather than hours. That night, lying in the small back room with only a partition separating him from Vrokka's sleeping space, Roderick stared at the ceiling and wondered what he was doing. 2 weeks in an orc village, living with a woman who made his heart race with just a smile, trying to maintain proper boundaries when every instinct urged him closer. It seemed like a recipe for heartbreak, but he could not bring himself to regret the circumstances that had brought him here. The next morning, Vrokka woke him early and explained that he would be expected to contribute to village life during his stay. The orcs believed in communal work, and anyone who ate their food and slept under their roofs had to earn their place. She took him to meet various work leaders, and after some discussion, it was decided he would help with farm work, as his skills were best suited to that. So Roderick found himself working alongside orc farmers, tending to large pigs and goats that provided much of the village's meat and milk, learning the differences between human and orc agricultural techniques. The other farmers were initially suspicious, watching him with wary eyes and speaking little, but as days passed and he proved himself a capable worker who pulled his weight without complaint, attitudes began to shift. A farmer named Kragthar became the first to truly warm to him, showing him the proper way to mix feed for pregnant goats and explaining the seasonal patterns that govern their breeding cycles. Kragthar's son Krunk was the little boy Roderick had mentioned to Vrokka, and the child had no fear of the human, chattering constantly and asking endless questions about human farms and animals and food. "My son likes you," Kragthar observed one afternoon as they repaired a fence together. "He is a good judge of character." "He is a bright boy," Roderick said sincerely. "You must be proud." "I am," Kragthar agreed. "And I am grateful to you. He would have drunk from the well that morning before I could stop him. He is always thirsty when he wakes." "You saved his life specifically, and I do not forget that." Word of that conversation must have spread, because afterward more orcs began to approach Roderick, thanking him quietly for his warning, offering small gestures of friendship. An elderly female brought him a pair of work gloves more suited to his smaller hands. A warrior nodded respectfully when they passed. A mother let her children play near him without hovering protectively. Vrokka noticed the changes and seemed pleased. "You are winning them over," she said one evening as they prepared dinner together, a routine they had fallen into naturally. "Some were skeptical, but you are proving yourself through your actions." "I am just being myself," Roderick said, cutting vegetables while she seasoned meat. "I do not know how to be anyone else." "That is why it works," Vrokka replied. "They can sense authenticity. Orcs do not trust pretty words, but we trust consistent behavior." Their own relationship was evolving as well, though neither spoke of it directly. They moved around each other in her home with increasing ease, learning each other's rhythms and preferences. Roderick discovered that Vrokka hummed while she cooked, wordless melodies that sounded like lullabies. Vrokka learned that Roderick talked to himself while he worked, muttering through problems and solutions aloud. He started making tea the way she liked it, strong with a hint of mint. She started leaving the window open at night because she had noticed he slept better with fresh air. They were becoming something more than friends, something deeper than allies, but the unspoken boundaries remained. They did not touch beyond what was necessary. They did not speak of feelings or possibilities, but the tension grew with each passing day, a taut string waiting to snap. On the 8th day, everything changed. Roderick was working in the goat pens when shouts rang out from the village perimeter, urgent and alarmed. He dropped his tools and ran toward the sound, joining orcs rushing to see what had caused the disturbance. At the village edge, a group of warriors surrounded something on the ground, and when Roderick pushed through the crowd, his blood ran cold. Marcus lay bleeding and barely conscious, his clothes torn and soaked with blood, his face a mass of bruises. Roderick dropped to his knees beside his friend, checking for serious wounds and finding too many to count. "Marcus, what happened?" Roderick demanded, supporting his friend's head carefully. "Raiders," Marcus gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "The same ones who poisoned the well. They came to your farm looking for you. Said you betrayed them by warning the orcs. They wanted to know where you were. I would not tell them. They did this." He coughed and more blood came. "They said they will attack the village next. Tonight. 50 men, maybe more. They want to finish what they started." Horror and guilt crashed over Roderick in equal measure. His warning had brought this. His presence here had painted a target on the village. He looked up to find Vrokka staring at him, her face pale, and behind her stood Chief Throg with several senior warriors. "How many warriors does Kragthar have?" Roderick asked Throg directly, already knowing the answer would not be enough. 23, Throg said grimly. "Against 50 trained raiders, we cannot win a direct fight. We will have to evacuate the children and elders, then try to hold them long enough for the others to escape into the forest." "No," Roderick said sharply, an idea forming with desperate speed. "There is another way. My farm is between here and where the raiders are camped. If we can make them think the village has been warned and reinforced, they might turn back." "How?" Vrokka demanded. "We have no reinforcements." "But they do not know that," Roderick said, his mind racing. "I know the land around my farm better than anyone. There are places to hide archers, places to channel attackers into killing zones, ways to make a small force seem much larger in darkness. If we can set an ambush and make them believe they are facing greater numbers than they expected, they might retreat. Or they might kill us all," Garrick said, having appeared in the crowd. "You are asking us to trust a human's plan, to risk our warriors on your word." "I am asking you to trust me," Roderick corrected, standing to face the larger warrior. "I brought warning once and saved your village. I am offering to do it again, but this time I risk my own life with yours. If the plan fails, I die too." Throg studied him in silence, then looked at Vrokka. "You know him best. Do you trust him?" Vrokka met Roderick's eyes and he saw the conflict there, the fear and hope warring in her expression. Then she squared her shoulders and nodded. "I trust him with my life, Chief, with all our lives." "Then we follow his plan," Throg decided. "Roderick, explain exactly what you propose." They spent the next hours preparing, moving with organized urgency as Roderick laid out his strategy. He drew maps in the dirt, showing the approaches to his farm, the large barn that could hide archers, the fence lines that would funnel attackers into predetermined paths, the ravine beyond the east field that was nearly invisible in darkness. Vrokka contributed her knowledge of orc fighting tactics, suggesting modifications that made the plan stronger. Together, they created something that might actually work. Marcus was given to Hakra's care, his wounds treated as much as possible, and he gripped Roderick's hand before the warriors departed. "I am sorry," Marcus whispered. "I tried not to tell them anything." "You told them nothing important," Roderick assured him. "And you likely saved us all by bringing warning. Rest now. We will handle this." 15 orc warriors made the journey to Roderick's farm, moving swiftly through the forest with a silence that impressed him. Vrokka stayed at his side, her bow strung and ready, her face set in grim determination. When they reached the farm, they had perhaps 2 hours before the raiders arrived, and they used every minute. Roderick positioned archers in the barn loft with clear sight lines to the main approach. He had warriors dig shallow trenches across the paths and cover them with brush to trip runners. He placed fighters with spears in positions where they could strike from concealment, then retreat. Vrokka helped him rig his oil lanterns with extended wicks that could be lit and thrown as firebombs. Every trick he had ever learned from his father's stories of war was employed, every advantage of home territory exploited. When the preparations were complete, they waited in tense silence as the sun sank below the horizon. Roderick crouched behind a water trough near the barn, Vrokka beside him, and tried to calm his racing heart. He had never been in combat, had never killed a man, and the reality of what was coming terrified him. But the alternative was watching the orcs who had become his friends die or flee their home, and that was unacceptable. "Whatever happens," Vrokka whispered, her voice barely audible, "thank you for trying." "We are going to survive this," Roderick whispered back. "Both of us. I have not come this far to lose you now." She looked at him sharply, but before she could respond, Garak signaled from his position near the fence. The raiders were coming. They approached without stealth, 50 men carrying torches and weapons, confident in their numbers and intent. Roderick recognized the lead man from descriptions Marcus had given, a scarred brute named Torvin who had been raiding border settlements for years. They paused at the property edge, and Roderick heard Torvin's voice carry across the night air. "The farm is dark. The coward is probably still hiding in the orc village. We burn this place and move on to finish them." That was Roderick's signal. He lit an arrow wrapped in oil-soaked cloth and passed it to Vrokka, who stood and fired in one smooth motion, the flaming arrow arcing through the darkness to strike the ground 10 feet in front of the raiders. Before they could react, a dozen more fire arrows followed from different positions, creating a wall of flames that made the raiders stumble back. "Torvin," Roderick shouted, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the barn. "You poisoned a well of innocence and nearly killed children. Now you come to finish your cowardly work. But we were warned and we are ready. Leave now or die here." The raiders hesitated, clearly surprised by organized resistance, and Roderick saw Torvin scanning the darkness trying to assess numbers. To help his uncertainty, Garak stood and launched a spear that took one raider through the shoulder, then vanished back into shadow. Another warrior showed himself briefly on the barn roof before disappearing. Vrokka fired arrow after arrow from different positions, moving quickly to create the impression of multiple archers. "It is a trick," Torvin shouted, rallying his men. "There cannot be many of them. Push forward." The raiders charged, and Roderick's heart nearly stopped, but the plan held. The first runners hit the concealed trenches and fell, creating obstacles for those behind. Fire bombs flew from the barn, exploding into pools of burning oil that blocked approach routes. Arrows came from seemingly everywhere, not enough to kill many but enough to wound and terrify and sow confusion. The raiders faltered, their charge breaking against unexpected resistance, and in that moment of chaos, Garak led a handful of warriors in a lightning strike from the ravine side. They hit the raiders' flank, killed 3 men in seconds, and vanished back into darkness before the enemy could organize a response. To the raiders, already unnerved and disoriented, it must have seemed like they were surrounded by a much larger force. "Fall back." Someone yelled, and then others took up the cry. "It is an ambush! Fall back!" Torvin tried to restore order, screaming at his men to hold, but fear had taken root and it spread like wildfire. The raiders broke, abandoning their torches and weapons as they fled into the night, and the orcs let them go, knowing that pursuit would reveal their true numbers. When the sounds of retreat faded, silence fell over the farm except for the crackling of dying fires and the moans of wounded raiders left behind. Roderick remained frozen behind the water trough, unable to quite believe they had won, that his desperate plan had actually worked. "Roderick," Vrokka said, touching his shoulder gently, "it is over. We won." He turned to look at her, seeing his own disbelief mirrored in her face, and then suddenly they were both laughing, wild and relieved laughter that bordered on hysteria. The other warriors emerged from their positions, checking the wounded raiders and securing the perimeter, and Garak approached Roderick with something new in his expression. "You fought well, human," the big warrior said, extending his arm in the orc gesture of respect. "You have earned warriors' honor this night." Roderick clasped his arm, feeling the strength in Garak's grip, and nodded his thanks. Around them, other warriors offered similar acknowledgments, and he realized he had passed some invisible test in their eyes. He was no longer an outsider to be watched, but a fighter who had stood with them and bled with them, even though his blood had thankfully remained inside his body. They spent the next hour securing the farm and treating the wounded raiders, who would be held for questioning and possible trade back to human authorities. None of the orc warriors had died, though 2 had minor wounds, and Roderick's property had escaped major damage beyond some scorched fields and broken fences. Given what could have happened, it was a miracle. As dawn approached, Throg arrived with more warriors, ready to reinforce what he had expected to be a desperate last stand. When he found instead a secured position and defeated enemies, his scarred face split in a wide grin. "You have done well, all of you," the old chief declared. "Roderick Jameson, you have now saved our village twice. The debt we owe you has grown beyond easy measure." "I only ask one thing in payment," Roderick said, surprising himself with his boldness, but knowing he would never have a better moment. "Let me stay in Kragthar, not as a prisoner or guest, but as a member of your clan. Let me live among you and work with you. Let me build a life in your village." Silence greeted his words, every orc staring at him with varying degrees of shock. Throg's expression was unreadable, and Roderick forced himself not to look at Vrokka, afraid of what he might see in her face. "You would leave your own people?" Throg asked finally. "Abandon your farm and your human life?" "This farm was my father's dream, not mine," Roderick said honestly. "I have lived here because it was what I inherited, not because it made me happy. In Kragthar I have found purpose. I have found friendship. I have found a place where what I do matters, where I am valued for who I am rather than what species I was born. I want to stay." He did look at Vrokka then and saw tears streaming down her green cheeks, her hands pressed to her mouth. Her eyes held everything he had been afraid to hope for, joy and fear and desperate longing all tangled together. "The council will discuss this," Throg said, his voice softer than before. "But I will tell you now, Roderick Jameson, that I favor your request. You have more than earned a place among us if it is truly what you want." "It is," Roderick confirmed, "more than anything." The return to Kragthar felt like a victory march, warriors singing battle songs and retelling the night's events with increasing dramatic flair. Marcus was recovering under Hakra's care, and when Roderick checked on him, his friend grasped his hand tightly. "You are really going to do it?" Marcus asked. "Leave the human world and live with orcs, if they will have me," Roderick confirmed. "Are you angry?" "I am terrified for you," Marcus admitted. "But I also understand. I saw how you looked at her, Roderick. The orc woman Vrokka, you love her." Roderick started to deny it, then stopped, because what was the point of lying now? "I do," he said simply. "I have for a while, I think. Maybe from the beginning." "Then go be happy," Marcus said, squeezing his hand once more before releasing it. "You rode through the night to save people you barely knew. You deserve someone who sees that goodness in you." The council met that afternoon, and Roderick stood before them with Vrokka at his side, though she was there in her capacity as translator and cultural guide rather than as an advocate. The debate was lengthy and sometimes heated, with some elders expressing concern about setting a precedent and others arguing that Roderick had proven himself beyond any reasonable doubt. Finally, Hakra stood, her ancient voice cutting through the discussion. "I have lived 87 years," she said. "I have seen war and peace, hatred and love, division and unity. This human has done more for our clan in 2 weeks than some orcs do in a lifetime. He saved us from poison. He defended us from raiders. He asks not for reward or payment, but simply to belong. How can we, who have always claimed to value honor and deeds above bloodlines, turn him away?" Throg nodded slowly, then looked at the other elders. "We vote. Those in favor of accepting Roderick Jameson as a clan member stand." Hakra stood immediately. After a moment, 2 other elders rose, then the 4th. Finally, the last elder, who had been most vocal in opposition, sighed and stood as well. "It is unanimous," Throg declared. "Roderick Jameson, from this day forward you are a member of Clan Kragthar. You will have all the rights and responsibilities of any orc born to this village. You will share in our triumphs and our hardships, our joys and our sorrows. Welcome home." Roderick felt his throat tighten with emotion, unable to fully process what had just happened. He had walked into an orc village as a desperate messenger, and would leave as one of them, accepted and belonging in a way he had never quite felt in human society. He bowed deeply, the gesture feeling inadequate but being all he could manage. When he straightened, Vrokka was looking at him with an expression that made his heart race. As soon as they left the longhouse, she grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the forest edge, away from curious eyes and listening ears. When they were alone, she turned to face him, her hands gripping his arms. "You are serious?" she demanded. "You truly want to stay? This was not some dramatic gesture made in the heat of battle." "I have never been more serious about anything," Roderick said, reaching up to cup her face gently, his thumb brushing away the tears still lingering on her cheeks. "I want to stay because Kragthar has become home. But I especially want to stay because you are here, and the thought of leaving you is unbearable." "Roderick," she whispered, and he heard a lifetime of longing in his name. "I love you, Vrokka," he said, the words spilling out now that there were no more barriers to speaking them. "I think I have loved you since you shared your lunch with me at the trading post and told me about your nephew. I love your strength and your kindness. I love how you hum while you cook, and how you talk to plants when you think no one is listening. I love you, and if you feel anything similar, I need to know." She answered by kissing him, her lips meeting his with a fierce tenderness that stole his breath and filled his chest with warmth. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened as 2 weeks of restraint and longing poured out between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she said softly. "I have been trying not to, trying to protect myself from the pain of wanting something impossible. But then you made the impossible happen. You forced the world to change rather than accepting it as it was. How could I not love you?" They stood in the forest holding each other as the sun began to set, and Roderick felt a peace settle over him that he had been searching for his entire life. This was where he belonged, in this place with this woman, building something new from the ruins of old prejudices. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. Roderick sold his farm to Marcus, who had always wanted more land, and moved his few meaningful possessions to Kragthar. The transition from guest to resident involved learning countless small customs and protocols, but Vrokka guided him patiently, and other villagers helped fill in gaps. Krusk taught him the proper way to honor the hunting spirits before a kill. Hakra showed him which forest plants were medicinal and which were deadly. Garak, surprisingly, became a friend, the warrior's initial hostility transforming into gruff affection. And through it all, Vrokka was his constant companion, his teacher and partner in love. They did not live together immediately, propriety still requiring certain observances, but everyone knew they were courting in the orc fashion. Roderick learned to carve traditional courting gifts, spending hours with a knife and wood creating clumsy tokens that Vrokka treasured as if they were masterpieces. She taught him orc dances and songs, laughing at his mistakes but praising his persistence. 2 months after Roderick joined the clan, he approached Throg with a formal request for permission to propose marriage to Vrokka. The old chief had grinned and given his blessing immediately, then spent an hour explaining the proper ceremony and traditions involved in orc marriages. Roderick listened intently, determined to honor Vrokka's culture completely. He chose the first day of spring to propose, knowing Vrokka loved the season of renewal and growth. He led her to a clearing in the forest where wildflowers were beginning to bloom, and there, following orc tradition, he knelt before her with both hands extended, palms up. "Vrokka," he began, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "You are my dawn after darkness, my hearth in winter, my safe harbor in storms. You have taught me that home is not a place but a person, and you are my home. I offer you my hands to work beside yours, my strength to support you, my heart to love you all my days. Will you accept my bond and become my wife?" She placed her hands in his, the gesture signifying acceptance, and smiled through her tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Roderick Jameson. I will be your wife and you will be my husband, and we will build a life together that honors both our peoples." The wedding took place 3 weeks later, a grand celebration that brought together the entire village and even a few brave humans from nearby settlements who had heard about the unusual union. Marcus attended, serving as Roderick's witness in the human tradition, and Hakra performed the ceremony in the orc fashion, binding their hands with blessed cord while speaking ancient words about unity and partnership. They danced until dawn, Roderick learning that orc wedding celebrations were enthusiastic affairs involving much food, drink, and singing. Vrokka glowed with happiness, her smile never fading, and every time Roderick looked at her, he felt his heart expand with joy and wonder that this remarkable woman had chosen him. Their wedding night was spent in a new home the village had helped them build, a larger structure with space for the family they both hoped to have someday. As they lay together in the darkness, Vrokka's head resting on his chest and his arms wrapped around her, Roderick thought back to that desperate ride through the night that had started everything. "You ever regret it?" Vrokka asked sleepily, as if reading his thoughts. "Giving up your human life?" "Never," Roderick said firmly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Every choice I made led me here to you, to this life. How could I regret the path that brought me home? We will face challenges," Vrokka said. "There will be humans who hate us for this union, orcs who question it. Our children, if we have them, will walk between two worlds. Then we will teach them to be bridges," Roderick said. "We will show them that love is stronger than prejudice, that courage means standing for what is right even when it is difficult. That family is built through choice and commitment rather than blood alone." Vrokka tilted her head to kiss him, slow and deep, and when she pulled back her eyes shone in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I am so glad you rode through the night," she whispered. "I am so glad you did not turn back." "I am too," Roderick agreed, pulling her closer. "I am too." The seasons turned, and their life together unfolded in the steady rhythm of village existence. Roderick became known throughout the borderlands as a bridge between species, helping facilitate trade agreements and peace talks that would have been impossible before. His presence in Kragthar and his obvious happiness there challenged assumptions on both sides and slowly, incrementally, began to shift attitudes. Vrokka's healing skills flourished, and she became the primary healer for several neighboring settlements, both orc and human. She trained apprentices and wrote down her knowledge in books that would outlast her, building a legacy of compassion and expertise. Together, she and Roderick planted gardens that fed not just their family but anyone in need, believing that empty bellies bred hatred while full ones encouraged fellowship. A year after their marriage, Vrokka gave birth to a daughter, a beautiful child with her mother's green skin and amber eyes but her father's softer features. They named her Alara, meaning star-light in the human tongue and hope-bearer in Orcish, and she became the darling of the entire village. Watching Vrokka nurse their daughter while humming those wordless lullabies, Roderick felt a contentment so complete it almost frightened him. 3 years later, a son followed, robust and loud and endlessly curious. They named him Thomas, after Roderick's father, honoring the man whose wisdom about judging people by their actions had ultimately made all of this possible. The boy had his father's brown hair and eyes but his mother's strength and athletic build, and he grew like a weed, keeping both parents constantly busy. Chief Throg passed away peacefully in his sleep when Alara was 5, and the clan chose Garak to succeed him, a decision everyone supported. One of Garak's first acts as chief was to formally establish diplomatic relations with human settlements, using Roderick as his primary envoy. The work was difficult, and progress came slowly, but each small victory, each trade agreement signed and border dispute resolved peacefully, felt like vindication of the choice Roderick had made that desperate night so many years ago. Marcus remained Roderick's closest human friend, visiting Kragthar regularly and eventually marrying an orc woman himself, emboldened by Roderick's example. Their children grew up together, and the next generation knew no automatic prejudice between species, seeing instead only playmates and friends. On the 10th anniversary of that midnight ride, Vrokka and Roderick stood together at the village well, the structure that had started everything. It had been thoroughly cleaned and rebuilt in the years since the poisoning, and now featured a plaque commemorating Roderick's warning and the lives saved that night. "You remember how terrified you were?" Vrokka asked, her hand finding his. "Riding into an orc village in the middle of the night. I remember thinking I might die but knowing I had to try," Roderick said. "I could not live with myself if I had not warned you. And now you live with me instead," Vrokka said with a smile. "A far better arrangement." "Infinitely better," Roderick agreed, pulling her close. "Though I occasionally miss sleeping peacefully through the night without children climbing into our bed." "They will grow," Vrokka said, "and then you will miss these days of sticky hands and endless questions." She was right, of course. Roderick already felt time moving too quickly, his children growing from babies to youngsters with alarming speed. But he treasured every moment, every sticky hug and ridiculous question, every scraped knee he bandaged and bedtime story he told. That evening, the village gathered for a celebration feast marking the anniversary, and Roderick found himself surrounded by friends and family, his children playing with other youngsters while adults told and retold stories of that fateful night. The details had grown somewhat exaggerated over the years, the number of raiders increasing and the danger intensifying with each retelling, but the core remained true. A human had risked everything to save orcs, and in doing so had changed the world just a little bit. As the feast wound down and people began heading home, Hakra approached Roderick, moving slowly now with her great age but still sharp-eyed and quick-witted. She sat beside him on a bench near the fire, watching the embers glow in the darkness. "I am proud of you," she said without preamble. "Not just for what you did then, but for what you have built since. You and Vrokka have created something important here." "We have been lucky," Roderick said modestly. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Kragthar corrected. "You made a choice to see orcs as people rather than monsters. You made a choice to risk danger to save lives. You made a choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. Those were not luck, those were character. And now you raise children who will never have to make the choice between love and prejudice, because you have shown them a different way." "I hope so," Roderick said. "I hope the world they inherit is kinder than the one we knew." "It will be," Kragthar said confidently, "because of people like you and Vrokka who refused to accept the world as it was and insisted on something better. That is what changes everything, one stubborn heart at a time." She patted his hand and stood, moving off into the darkness toward her home, and Roderick remained by the fire thinking about her words. He had never set out to change the world or challenge prejudices or build bridges between species. He had simply done what seemed right in the moment, acted on instinct and compassion rather than fear, and somehow that had been enough. Vrokka joined him a few minutes later, their children sleepy and ready for bed. They walked home together under a sky full of stars, Elara holding her father's hand while Thomas rode on his mother's shoulders, and Roderick felt gratitude wash over him for the life he had found. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Roderick and Vrokka sat together on their porch watching the moon rise. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her waist, holding her close. "I was thinking," Vrokka said quietly, "about that night you rode to warn us, about how everything could have gone so differently. If you had arrived 10 minutes later, if the elders had refused to believe you, if the raiders had attacked before we could prepare. So many moments where everything could have been lost." "But none of that happened," Roderick said. "We were given chances and we took them. We were offered a future and we claimed it. That is what matters." "I am glad you are reckless," Vrokka said with a small laugh. "I am glad you rode through the night without thinking of the danger. I am glad you stayed when you could have left. I am glad for every impulsive, courageous choice you made that brought us to this moment." "I am glad you were willing to trust a reckless human," Roderick countered. "I am glad you defended me to your people, that you opened your home to me, that you taught me to belong here. I am glad for every moment of patience and faith that allowed me to become part of your life." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Roderick thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first meeting at the trading post to this moment of perfect contentment, every step had been necessary. Every challenge had shaped them. Every choice had mattered. The well had been poisoned, and no one had told them, so he had ridden all night to reach the orc village, and in doing so had found not just friendship but love, not just acceptance but home. It was a story that would be told long after they were gone, a testament to the power of compassion over fear, connection over division, love over hate. And as he sat there holding his wife under the stars, their children sleeping safely inside, their future bright with possibility, Roderick knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choices again without hesitation. Because this life, this love, this family was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any desperate midnight ride through dangerous territory. The moon climbed higher, painting everything in silver light, and Vrokka lifted her head to kiss him softly. "Come to bed," she whispered. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, and we should face them rested." They went inside together, checking on their children one last time before retreating to their own room. As Roderick lay down beside his wife, feeling her warmth against him, He sent a silent thanks to whatever forces had guided him that night so many years ago. He had ridden through darkness to save lives, and in doing so had found the light that would guide the rest of his days. Outside, the village slept peacefully, protected by walls and warriors and the knowledge that they were not alone in the world. Inside, a family rested, bound by love that transcended species and culture, proving that the bravest act was choosing connection over fear. And somewhere in the space between, the story lived on, growing and spreading, changing hearts and minds one listener at a time. This was how the world changed, Roderick thought as sleep claimed him. Not through grand declarations or sweeping reforms, but through individual choices to be kind, to be brave, to love across boundaries that others insisted were uncrossable. The well had been poisoned, but they had survived. The raiders had attacked, but they had prevailed. Every challenge had been met and overcome, because they had faced it together. And in the morning, they would wake to new challenges and meet those too, side by side, partners and lovers and friends, human and orc, father and mother. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from that unlikely beginning. The moon set and the sun rose, as it always had and always would, and in the village of Kragthar, life went on, richer for the choices of one brave man and one remarkable woman, brighter for the family they had created, better for the bridges they had built. The story was far from over, but this chapter had reached its perfect ending. All threads closed, all questions answered, all promises fulfilled. Roderick had ridden through the night to reach the orc village, and in doing so had found his home, his heart, his happily ever after. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.